You're welcome to the Gavel. I'm Linda Akibi. Members of the organized labor staged a protest in Abuja to the National Assembly on March 10th to challenge the bill seeking to amend the National Minimum Wage Act. Now, the House of Representatives passed through second reading a bill to amend the National Minimum Wage Act by transferring minimum wage prescription from the exclusive legislative list to the concurrent legislative list. Now, the bill, if passed, will allow states to pay according to their capacity. But the organized labor says such move is a breach of international labor law agreement which Nigeria subscribed to and also detrimental to the welfare of members. A bill from the House of Representatives has the National Assembly on a collision course with the Nigerian Labour Congress. The bill is for an act to alter the constitution to transfer minimum wage prescription from the exclusive legislative list to the concurrent legislative list. The bill, if passed, will allow states to pay according to their capacity. The sponsor of the bill, Garba Dati, says this has become necessary because some states cannot pay the new minimum wage. The House of Representatives is worried that despite the new minimum wage law, which stipulates a minimum salary of 30,000 naira, some states are yet to comply.
Mr. Speaker, there does not appear any propriety in the federal government imposing the national minimum wage when the resources available to the federal government are at variance with those available to the state government or each state. The resources available to each state differ, and while some states may be able to afford the national minimum wage, others cannot, especially states like Lagos. Mr. Speaker, even within the states, you find out that the local governments are not the same. Some can afford this, some cannot.
Some lawmakers supported the bill.
Mr. Speaker, we all know that in America, the New Yorkers, different from the Chicago's, different from the Maryland, and all whatnot. Every man according to your capacity and ability. But in Nigeria here, somebody who works in Lantan may not be paid with the same person who works in Asokoro. A room in Jos is not more than 100,000 a year. A room in Asokoro is about 750. Now you bring the two persons and you say because of minimum wage, you pay the Asokoro man 30,000 naira, you pay the Lantan man 30,000 naira.
The issue of devolution of power is now, and all this leads to curing that request, demand, agitation for devolution of power. And so we should allow it. Mr. Speaker, if you go to where I come from, oil-producing areas, every item on sale there is very, very expensive. Very, very. Sometimes I tell my constituents, how do you pay this rent when you don't have industries here? Government is the only salary-paying agency. There is no other business there that people do to earn money. But because it is an oil-producing state, the rent is very, very exorbitant. Cost of living is very, very high. Prices of goods and services are very, very expensive. But what will the people do? Mr. Speaker, I think that this bill needs to pass for second reading and be transmitted to the Constitutional Committee on Constitutional Amendment.
My position is that we allow this bill to pass to second reading, but we should put a caveat that no state in this country will be allowed to pay less than 30,000 because it's not going to work. 30,000 cannot pay house rent. 30,000 cannot feed a child. 30,000 cannot take care of people who are pregnant and all that. So let the bill pass, but let us not subject our faith to people who will reduce this 30,000 minimum wage.
Some other lawmakers opposed the bill, insisting that it does not favor the people.
If you allow every state to negotiate, even to negotiate their minimum wage, with the Speaker, I can tell you very vividly, practically, you find some states will even argue that they can only pay 15,000 naira. That would be a very terrible decision to make. Even with the law telling us to pay 30,000, There are governors who came and said, look, I am going to pay beyond 30,000 because they wanted to be elected into office. When they got elected finally, they couldn't even pay the minimum wage. It became a subject of war. So we have to protect the vulnerable. We have to protect the people at the lower. I agree with people who say that the salaries at the federal level is different. I agree. But Mr. Speaker, I must tell you, even in states, you are at liberty to pay, even with the law saying that you should pay minimum of 30,000, you are even at liberty to pay 40,000 if you have the capacity. Nobody is saying you must maintain 30,000. Mr. Speaker, you come from Lagos State. I'm not sure that what is being paid as minimum wage is 30,000 in Lagos because they have the capacity to pay more. If there are states that have the capacity to pay 50,000, let them pay. Nobody will say, we will be clapping for them. But Mr. Speaker, if you allow states to pay on their own, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, we will come here with another bill urging states to state aside. So I want us to be cautious.
This bill, for me, is an incentive to assist states that have no progressive mind to continue to undermine workers. The concept of the collective bargaining is to set the minimum base. So even Babangida's argument for me can be turned to say it's positive. He is not opposing the bill as far as my reading of his perspective are concerned. States that are unable to pay is not because of inability. It is because of refusing to prioritize. States that is civil service, for instance, will begin to initiate white elephant project, building airport for only a state that is civil. When are they going to use the aircraft? On Saturday only or on Sunday? And they will go and build airport of 50, 60 million US. Why should we go into this? The intention of collective bargaining at the national, like I said, is to set parameters beyond which no state or no individual should go under.
I so much respect my brother, my leader, but I think this very bill is anti-people. It's anti-masses, and I believe it should not be allowed to pass through.
The bill was referred to the Constitution Review Committee, headed by the Deputy Speaker. More than a week after the House of Representatives passed the bill through second reading, members of the Nigerian Labour Congress held a protest march to the National Assembly to express displeasure over the bill.
Let me tell you the implication of removing the minimum wage from the exclusive list to the concurrent list. It then means that every governor, every employer will go and pay what he wants, which means there is no room for collective bargaining. Yes. They will go and pay slave wages and say that it has been removed from the Constitution. That is the implication. A worker will rise up and collect far less than even 10,000. That is what we must fight.
They were received by some principal officers of the National Assembly.
We will stand by you to ensure that the fundamental right of every worker is not only enforced, but is ensured and guaranteed. And I also want to guarantee you that our process includes the leadership, the entire leadership of the labor. They are going to be part and parcel of our deliberative process. And because of that, I believe you have confidence in your leadership. They have done a good job in the 8th Assembly. Do you have any doubt in them doing any good job now? Therefore, we are together with them, and I want to guarantee you that on behalf of distinguished Senator Ahmed Ibrahim Lawal, who is also a very progressive lawmaker, I want to assure you that do not go home having any fear. Go home and sleep with your eyes closed.
The House will have to put the bill through a public hearing to get the views of across sections of Nigerians on the bill. The NLC is sure to voice its opposition during the hearing, and the National Assembly is expected to consider the variety of views before taking a position. Let's take a look at more activities in the National Assembly during the week.
On the general principles,
a federal lawmaker, Senator Tanko Almakura, is sponsoring a bill to establish the Federal University Teaching Hospital, Lafia, Nasarawa State. The proposed medical institution is intended to facilitate the clinical training of medical students up to international standards.
in this bill referred to as Principal Act, to include an additional teaching hospital, the Federal University Lafayette Teaching Hospital, quote and unquote, thereby giving the recognition to the teaching hospital sought to be included in the Principal Act through this bill. The proposed amendment, when passed, will complete all the required legislative engagements or enactments to bring the Federal University Lafayette Teaching Hospital into full operation.
The spokesman for the House of Representatives says the National Assembly is broke and the lower chamber is owing contractors and consultants. According to him, the 128 billion naira National Assembly budget is inadequate because of the exchange rate. He stated this during a press briefing with members of the House of Representatives press corps. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives is urging the federal government to ensure that the £4.2 million looted by the former governor of Delta State, James Ibori, be returned to Delta State. The lawmakers insist that funds were stolen from Delta State and should rightly be returned to the state. The funds, according to the lawmakers, is needed for infrastructural development of the state. They insist that the total money recovered is £6.2 million and not £4.2 million as is being reported.
Worried that if federal government is allowed to appropriate the funds without recourse to the Delta State government, the people of Delta State will be shortchanged, deprived of their legitimate resources to improve on the economy of the state, as well as provide the requisite infrastructural development for their benefit. Further worried that from all indications and information to Delta State indicate that the actual money is £6.2 million, not £4.2 million. They have therefore resolved, urge federal government of Nigeria through the Federal Minister of Finance, Minister of Justice, to stop forthwith further appropriation or disbursement of recovered £6.2 million, pending the final determination of the matter by the House. Request the Federal Minister of Finance and Attorney General of the Federation to furnish the House with all particulars relating to the recovered money.
Following the release of Pastor Bulos Yikura, the House of Representatives is urging the federal government to urgently secure the release of Reverend Polycarp Zongo from Plateau State, who was abducted in October 2020 by Boko Haram insurgents. The House says it is aware that there is evidence of his capture as contained in the video released by the insurgents. The motion, which was taken as a matter of urgent public importance, was moved by Representative Dachum Bagos from Plateau State.
The House is aware that Reverend Polycarp Zongo, a pastor of Church of Christ in Nations Cook in Wildlife Park, Jos, Plateau State, along with two women who were heading to Gombe from Jos for a church conference, were adopted by Boko Haram on October 19, 2020. Also aware that there was evidence of his capture in a release video recorded by his adopters, where he pleaded with government and legislators to secure his release. Concerned that this is the 5th month of their captivity. Concerned also that the family, church, and community have been in grief since their capture.
A member of the House of Representatives, Jarigbe Agum, is raising concerns about what he describes as illegal occupation of his senatorial seat by Senator Stephen Ode. Representative Jarigbe Agum says Senator Ode continues to attend plenary illegally despite a Supreme Court judgment of February 25, 2021, which declared him winner of the Cross River North senatorial by-election. INEC declared PDP winner of the election, and Ode was sworn in at the Senate despite the legal tussles. However, Senator Ode has refuted this allegation and insists he was legally sworn in and no court in Nigeria has sacked him from the Senate. He says the Supreme Court judgment did not sack him and insists that he is the candidate nominated by the People's Democratic Party. A public analyst, Sesu Akume, has taken the National Assembly to court over two issues. The first is to stop them from providing for agencies which are not backed up by law in the budget. And the second is to compel the National Assembly to obey the Freedom of Information Act to the letter, especially Section 2, that would mean electronic voting, electronic clocking and out for attendance with the records open to the public. I had a chat with Sesu Akume to discuss these issues.
We've been wasting billions of naira every year for years. We waste so much money in different ways. For instance, as far back, everybody knows that most of our monies are used in running the government. It's used in running recurrent expenditure, not capital expenditure. The recurrent expenditure is in running the government. So we have numerous government agencies, many of them doing the same thing, just creating redundancies and wasting our money. We all know this. Everybody has spoken about it. In 2011, there was the Orosanye Committee that said there were 521 government agencies, many of them doing the same thing. The committee recommended cutting them down by up to a third or more. And then amongst these agencies, there were up to 50 of them that were not established according to law, which means they just wrote pieces of paper together and then created an agency and they'll be running. 50 of them. That was 10 years ago. As of today, we don't know how many agencies there are, but as of the last count in 2020, there were 929. So instead of cutting them, we almost doubled. The least the National Assembly can do is to do their job and establish those agencies by law so that the spending can be legitimate. But if it's not so, I'm asking the court to interpret the sections of the Constitution that speak about the National Assembly's role in creating legislation and then about funding and then the control of the purse. Whether it is true that the Constitution imagined or thoughts about us spending on agencies that are not known to law. I want the court to interpret that to me and whether it is a proper thing to do so. If it's not, we should stop spending on agencies that, as long as you're not established by law, we can't spend on you. You have to be properly established. The other thing I want is that for every subhead on the budget, let's know which act established the agency. So you have agency for XYZ. Quote the act there, let's see. So that when we see the budget at the top, we can know that this one is established by law. And if there's none, we know that this one is not established or backed by law. That way we'll be doing away with billions of naira we'll be wasting on agencies that are not backed by law. And for those ones that are critical that we actually do need, but they've been dragging their feet for years, it will make them sit up and actually pass them into law, and then the president will assent to it, and then we can do things properly. That's one suit.
We noticed a trend where different lawmakers are proposing bills for the establishment of tertiary institutions, medical centers, agricultural institutions in their constituencies. And here you're talking about the problem of having so many, more than 900 federal institutions in the country.
I think it's laziness. I think it's unpatriotic. I think it's, laziness and being selfish, self-centered, and being unpatriotic. I'll explain each of those. We don't have money to run the agencies that we have right now. We're borrowing to run Nigeria. If the monies we're paying, people were doing that, we're all borrowing it. How is this sustainable? How long shall we continue borrowing? And then we're using much of the money to service the debts. We're borrowing and servicing debts. So we're in a hole. When you get in a hole, what do you stop doing? You stop digging. And right now, by establishing more and more of those agencies that are doing the same things the other ones are doing, we're digging holes. It's laziness because there's so many models to establish the hospitals and universities, and that there's so many models. One of them is public-private partnerships, whereby the government may not even necessarily need to pay a dime, but those same things will be set up. The other part of it is setting up things that are of economic benefit. Many people are setting up universities and polytechnics to provide jobs for people in their constituencies. You can't set up a polytechnic to provide jobs, for goodness sake. How many people does a polytechnic employ? Why don't you create like special economic zones? Why don't you do such things that create hundreds of thousands of jobs without the government needing to spend a dime? So it's laziness, and because they don't care, they don't really care about it.
But that's not the work of the legislature.
That is their job.
You are creating economic zones.
Yes.
This should be the work of the governors.
No, it is the job of the legislators too, because creating economic zones It's part of the job of the federal government. That's why we have the National Economic Processing Zones Authority, NEBZA. That's their job. So it's for the legislators. What's the job of a legislator? It's representation. So if the federal government has an opportunity where you can have a special economic zone in your place, then that's part of the representation because it's bringing hundreds of thousands of jobs in your own place. Then it's your own job to think about it or get experts who can help you design the thing and bring something there that will make thousands, hundreds of thousands of people employed. It's not about setting up a school or setting up a hospital that you're going to be borrowing to sustain. Why are we getting the money that we're going to be paying in borrowing? It's not productive. It's not sustainable either. That's why it's lazy. And the other side of it is because they don't really care. After all, there's money to be spent. We don't care how it's gotten or how we're putting ourselves into trouble. That's a problem on its own.
Another case you've brought before the courts has to do with the Freedom of Information Bill.
The FOI Act is one of the most beautiful legislations in Nigeria. It went through so much trouble. It took like 10 years before it was passed. As a matter of fact, former President Obasanjo had boasted that it would not be passed because it was going to create accountability. But it happened under President Jonathan. That's one thing we should give him credit for. He actually did sign the Freedom of Information Act. Nobody believed it was going to be passed. The law compels public institutions to open their books for public scrutiny. It says so many things that should be published already. We don't even need to be asking. It should be published. It says information should be organized in such a way that the public can access it. And then it says once you ask for information, it should be granted in 3 days. 3 days. And if it takes too long, it should take 7 days. We don't take advantage of it. And then the other side of it is because the system doesn't like, the public institutions don't like accountability, they don't like scrutiny, they don't like any of those, they don't implement it. And I want it implemented. That's why I have gone to court maybe 4 different FOI cases or so. I also want it established at the local government level, at the state level, and indeed with the National Assembly. With the National Assembly, I have a House of Rep member representing me. I have a senator. I don't know whether they go to the place at all. I don't know whether they hold committee meetings. I don't know whether they go for plenary because the records are not there. I'm suing because I want the records to be made available. I want to see electronic clocking in, biometric clocking in, when they clock in and when they clock out. So let me know whether they're attending at all. I want to see what goes on in their committee meetings. Do they attend the committee hearings? The law says that when there are committee meetings or when there are sittings, we should get all the records. Let's know who voted for what or who voted against what. So you don't come telling me that I'm all for this, when you go back you do something else. Let's see it. All those voting, let the ayes have it, the nays, no. Let's do the electronic voting. Let's know who voted for what so that we can know. That's what the law is about. It already provides for it in Section 2 of the FOI Act. Incidentally, it's not published. We keep hearing about senators earn this. Senator Shehu Sani had said they earned 13.5 million naira or so. Senator Alun Dume said it's slightly above 30 million naira a month or so. Why are we having different figures?
What do you hope to achieve by bringing up this court case?
What I want this suit to achieve, like all impact litigation does, is to get us to think afresh, to think properly. Is it proper? Many of us don't know that we have 929 federal government agencies. What do we need 929 federal government agencies for goodness sake? Most of them are doing the same thing. And then many of them are not even established by law. Is this a proper thing? So I can just wake up one day and then write something somewhere and then create an agency and then put in the budget somewhere and somebody starts funding it? Are we a banana republic or something? I want us to do things in a proper way. I want us to conserve money. I want people who are paid to do their job to do it. Establish it properly according to law as it should. You'll be surprised the federal medical centers you spoke about, there are 26 of them that are not even established by law. Why do we have federal medical centers that are not established by law? What does it take to establish it by law?
Now, this is where we call it a day on this week's edition of The Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us and see you again next week.